Hello and welcome to my first video, which is about overthinking the Disney Fairies franchise. Now, I love the Disney Fairies franchise, but what makes the franchise better for me is deep history. We didn't hear too much about Pixie Hollow's history from official sources, and as a hardcore Disney Fairies fan, I really want to know. So, let's analyze the different storylines and create a timeline based on that. So, the Disney Fairies franchise has 4 different storylines, with the original storyline being the book storyline. In the Disney Fairies books, Pixie Hollow is in the heart of Neverland, and Never Fairies are born from a baby's first laugh. When they arrive to Pixie Hollow, they discover their talent and get their pixie dust. Pixie dust comes from the Dust Keepers grinding molted feathers from a magical bird named Mother Dove. Most fairies live in a tree in the heart of Pixie Hollow called the Home Tree. In the Realm of the Never Fairies book, an almanac of the book storyline, there's a page which describes the history of Pixie Hollow. It said that Pixie Hollow was once a great kingdom separate from Neverland, and you had to take a portal in Neverland to get there. Pixie Hollow used to be centered by the Pixie tree until it got destroyed in a battle. The next Disney Fairies storyline is the one in the 2007 Disney Fairies site. This storyline is basically what was described in the History of Pixie Hollow page, with the Pixie Dust Trio Marco portal and everything. In this storyline, fairies don't get their pixie dust when they first arrive. Young fairies, or hopefuls, first need to train in a place called the Conservatory, with Fairy Mary as teacher. After they complete their training, they're given pixie dust and are able to glow and travel to the mainland to inspire belief. Next is the movie storyline. In this storyline, Pixie Hollow is part of Neverland, and there's still a pixie dust tree, only it looks more like the home tree. Fairy Mary was the head of the Tinker Towns, and the fairies got their pixie dust right when they arrived. Pixie Hollow is divided into 4 seasons, and the fairies travel to the mainland to change the seasons. Last is the online world storyline. It's very similar to the movie storyline, but there are some book characters in this one. So, to start creating this timeline, we're going to find out the order of the 4 storylines, and then we'll be more specific. I'm pretty sure the 2007 Pixie Hollow storyline is first because it's very different than the other three. Pixie Hollow isn't part of Neverland in this one. Fairies didn't get their pixie dust when they first arrived. And the only thing wrong with this series is that TinkerBell was in the Pixie Hollow tour minigame in the 2007 site. But I'm still convinced that the first one had come first because it's very different than the other storylines. I believe the movie storyline comes next and the online world storyline comes after because some book characters arrived. The Autumn Revelry in Pixie Hollow was actually supposed to take place in the same time as TinkerBell and Lost Treasure because in the quest, Tink said that she was chosen to create the Autumn Scepter, and I think the book storyline is the most recent because it's the only one without the Pixie tree, and it definitely happened after Peter Pan, and I believe Peter Pan happened after the movies, and the Never Girls book series appears to take place in the present. Now that we know the order of the storylines, let's be more specific. So, I believe Neverland has existed for a very long time, before humans and fairies even existed. According to the Realm of the Never Fairies book, a fire swept Neverland, burning everything in its path, turning Mother Dove into a magical bird. I believe this took place so long ago because if it took place recently, everything in Neverland would be gone. So this is the beginning of the timeline, and I believe it's before humans have existed. So as with Pixie Hollow, it was a magical land, likely not shown in a map, similar to Neverland, and its portal is in the heart of Neverland. I actually created a bunch of random lands that aren't accessible by any map, but they are accessible via portals, so that's why I think Pixie Hollow was like one of those lands. Pixie Hollow may have started with a normal tree, but Pixie Dust started flowing when the first fairy was born. But when was that? That's where the complicated stuff starts. At first, I thought it was less than 1,000 years before Legend of the Neverbeast, because if the storm occurred before, then why is Pixie Hollow still standing? Sure, the Neverbeast actually prevented the storm, but why else would they believe the Neverbeast is evil? But I believe that occurred in the heart of Neverland before Pixie Hollow was part of it after thinking of it for a while. After all, it's called the Neverbeast. So I think that the time the first Never Fairy was born was during ancient times or so. You might think that was when the seasons started changing, but I believe that fairies don't actually change the seasons. They might say that, but they could be the ones that make the changing of the seasons magical with the spring flowers and autumn leaves. Besides, it's been scientifically proven that Earth's tilt causes season. It may seem like Tink told Lizzie it was fairies that changed the season and that the scientific theory was false, according to the scene TinkerBell the Great Fairy Rescue, where Lizzie was like, I had no idea fairies were responsible for changing the seasons. I thought it had something to do with the Earth's axis. Then TinkerBell said, that's what we wanted you to think. But here's the thing. Why would fairies want humans to think that? It would be so humans can't go hunting for fairies at the beginning of each season. But if the fairies actually come up with that theory, then they would tell humans. I believe there was a time when humans and fairies interacted more. If it was during a time when fairies felt safer talking to humans, then why would they make an explanation to keep themselves hidden if belief keeps them alive? I think that Tink was telling Lizzie that she wants humans to believe in the scientific theory so their work would stay hidden, but I believe that fairies do their seasonal work, but I don't think that are the reason fairies change seasons in the first place. So there still be seasons long before fairies. And another reason I believe that never fairies are after humans is because never fairies are very similar to humans in a way. Some might think that Queen Clarion is the firstborn fairy, as she's said to be the oldest and wisest. I actually thought that at one point. However, the Realm of the Never Fairies books mentions that there are multiple queens, so I don't think Queen Clarion was the firstborn fairy. She's just the oldest right now. But I'm guessing that the older fairies and like the older version of Pixie Hollow and ancient version are taller, as the queen and ministers are taller than the average fairies. The really old ones might have fancier wings like the queen's wings, or maybe the wings just transformed when she became queen. I don't know. But for the fairies as old as the queen and the ministers, their talents aren't remembered. They might not even had fairy talents back then. I wonder what happened to the fairies that were older than Queen Clarion. They could have died of disbelief, but I'm guessing more believed back then. Was that when humans and fairies stopped regularly interacting? Let me know what you think about the fairies older than Queen Clarion in the comments. Okay, so we've got the 2007 storyline covered. Now let's move on to the movie storyline. I'm guessing the appearance of the Pixie tree changed when Pixie Hollow became part of Neverland. I don't know how Pixie Hollow became part of Neverland. Maybe Neverland wanted Pixie Hollow to be part of it or something. Well, nothing's impossible in magical worlds. Anyway, let's figure out the order of the TinkerBell movies. So the first film is obviously first in the movie timeline, and I know it's followed by Lost Treasure, then Great Fairy Rescue, and then Secret of the Wings. I know that's the order because Blaze was in Great Fairy Rescue, and Tink mentions the previous movies in Secret of the Wings. Now things get more complicated with the other movies as well as Pixie Hollow games. I know the Pirate Fairy and Legend of the Neverbeast take place after Secret of the Wings, as there are winter fairies in the Four Seasons Festival, and Tink went to the Winter Woods as Legend of the Never Beast. But which of those two movies came first? I'm guessing the Pirate Fairy. If the first four movies were in consecutive order, it would make sense if the other two were. And as for the Pixie Hollow games, I believe it took place before Secret of the Wings because there isn't a Wintertown Team Flag or Butterfly. My personal guess is that it was after Great Fairy Rescue, keeping the order. So this is the timeline so far, just to recap a bit, and now we're going to move on to the Peter Pan storyline. So the Peter Pan storyline is where TinkerBell goes on adventures all over Neverland with Peter Pan. I know the Pixie Dust tree was destroyed between the movie and book storylines, and that was when the Peter Pan era took place, but I'm not sure if it happened before or after Tink met Peter. What do you think? Well, according to the book, The Trouble with Tink, Tink went back to Pixie Hollow right after Peter brought Wendy to Neverland. Shortly after Tink returns to Pixie Hollow, the book storyline begins with fairy dust and the quest for the egg, where Prilla arrives to Pixie Hollow. Tink reunites with Peter again in The Trouble with Tink. Tink returns to Pixie Hollow after that, but promises to visit Peter again. Not exactly sure when many of the books took place, but during this time, after The Trouble with Tink, was when Tink visited Peter and went on another adventure. That was when the Peter Pan sequel, Return to Neverland, took place. And I'm guessing TinkerBell didn't like Jane in Return to Neverland because she didn't want to deal with this whole Peter-Wendy heartbreak thing again, which caused her to stop going on all these adventures altogether. So yeah. I'm guessing that the book storyline is between Prilla's arrival and the present. I'm guessing the Gail Carson Levine books happened in chronological order, with the Fairy Haven and Quest for the Wand happening a few years after the first one. The third book took place closer to the present, several years after Return to Neverland, and the timeline ends with the Never Girls, which took place way more recently. Alright, so here's our timeline so far. Now that we know the order those movies and books and stuff took place in, we'll find the exact times. The best way to start with that is to start with what we know. Let's work backwards and begin with the book and the Peter Pan storylines. Return to Neverland took place in World War II, which is in the 1940s. As for the original Peter Pan, I'm guessing it took place in 1904 because that was when the book was published. The calendar in the Peter Pan's flight ride even says 1904. It would also be reasonable for the movie to take place then. Plus, if the original movie happened during this time period, I would guess that Wendy would be in her 40s and 50s and Return to Neverland, which is a reasonable age for parenting and having a daughter that was around her age when she first met Peter. With that evidence, I'm pretty sure Fairy Dust and the Quest for the Egg and The Trouble with Tink took place sometime between 1905 and the 1940s. Fairy Haven and the Quest for the Wand took place a few years after Fairy Dust and the Quest for the Egg, and Fairies in the Quest for Neverland took place many years after the 1940s, as Wendy is one of Gwendolyn's ancestors, and I'm fairly certain the Never Girls took place in the present, so we've got the more recent part of the timeline done now. As for the movies, the best place to start is with the first TinkerBell movie because Wendy was in that one. What we know from that movie is that Wendy was pretty young, has lost a music box for at least a year, I'm guessing, and she appears to have her own bedroom, assuming her brothers weren't born yet, or at least old enough to not be sleeping in a crib. With that evidence, as well as the evidence for the Peter Pan movie, I'm guessing that the first TinkerBell movie took place in the late 19th century in late winter and early spring. At first, I thought Great Fairy Rescue took place the summer after the first movie, as this was TinkerBell's quote-unquote first summer on the mainland, but this movie took place after Lost Treasure as Blaze was in it, and Lost Treasure took place during autumn, What I'm guessing is that even though Tinkertowns were allowed to go to the mainland, they had very minor roles to the point where only a few of them went. For example, when TinkerBell went to the mainland for her first time, it was only to deliver a music box. The only other Tinker Fairies that went were Clank and Bobble. Tink wasn't even in the mainland in the Lost Treasure. So Great Fairy Rescue was when Tink went to the mainland for the first time in the summer. I'm guessing that Lost Treasure took place in the fall at the same year as the first movie, with Great Fairy Rescue taking place the summer after. As for Secret of the Wings, the junior novelization says the events of Great Fairy Rescue took place quote-unquote this past summer, saying that Secret of the Wings likely occurred the fall after Great Fairy Rescue. Yes, I'm pretty sure the movie took place in the fall because the fairies are preparing for winter with snowflake baskets and stuff. And the Pixie Hollow games likely happened in early fall between these two movies. I'm not exactly sure when Pirate Fairy and Legend of the Never Beast took place, but I'm guessing the Pirate Fairy is 2 years or less after Secret of the Wings because the Winter Fairies are at the Four Seasons Festival for the first time. And I'm not sure about Legend of the Never Beast, but I'm sure it happened before 1904. I'm guessing at least a year before that because Tink hasn't met Peter yet. Okay, so here's our timeline so far. Now all that's left to review is the first storyline. These were likely the first several years of Pixie Hollow. My guess is that it happened at least a century before the first movie. So the timeline is done. Let's recap. Neverland was an enchanted island which existed for a long time. There was once a fire that swept through, burning everything in its path. This transformed Mother Dove into a magical bird. In the heart of Neverland, there was a portal to the magical realm of Pixie Hollow. Pixie dust started flowing from the pixie dust tree when the first fairy was born. The original fairies, which included Clarion, were taller with larger wings. Wings eventually became simpler. Clarion became the queen and fell in love with Lord Mallory sometime in this era. Later, Pixie Hollow became part of Neverland and fairies got their pixie dust when they were born as opposed to having to trade for it. TinkerBell arrived sometime in the late 1800s. During that time, she created inventions, accidentally broke the Moonstone, met a clumsy named Lizzie, ventured in the winter woods, met pirates, and did several other things. One day, she met a human boy named Peter Pan and spent her time going on adventures with him. Sometime around that time, there was a battle which destroyed the pixie dust tree. Luckily, the fairies found Mother Dove and learned how to use her feathers to make pixie dust. TinkerBell continued to go on adventures with Peter until sometime around 1904, when Peter met Wendy. Tink returned to Pixie Hollow after that. In the 20th century or so, a clapping talent named Prilla arrived in Pixie Hollow and she, along with 2 other fairies, saved Mother Dove's egg. Several of the book's events happened during that time, including the moment where Tink reconnected with Peter. She visited him again in the 1940s, and that's when Wendy's daughter went to Neverland. The book events then continued until the present era, when Prilla accidentally took 4 human girls to Pixie Hollow using her blink. So this is my timeline. How does it look? Sure, it's impossible for me to avoid some continuity errors, but this is the best I could do, and it took me a while to make. But if there's anything you would like to add, please tell me. I'd love to learn more things. Thank you for watching my video, and stay tuned for more cool stuff.